Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be back. Michael has put his imprint on parks around the country, a very naturalistic, beautiful imprint. But landscape design is more than just about, more than aesthetics. He's really solved and remediated urban problems through his work. And he's going to take us on a tour, a visual tour of his parks, and we are going to start with the Gateway Park, St. Louis, home of the famous Arch. Built in the late 1940s, fell into disrepair, wasn't being used, wasn't connected to downtown. And Michael was brought in to redo it and was really to remediate problems that came from a real Robert Moses way of thinking. Is that right?
That's a good start. Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to start out by saying that, like a number of the projects that I'm going to show you after the St. Louis Arch, this started with a young architect, Eero Saarinen, and a young landscape architect, Dan Kiley, winning an international competition in 1947. It actually took until '65 for the arch to be completed. And if you think for a second about American cities between post-World War II and the mid-'60s, it is significantly a period of time about the rise of the automobile. And if we look at a photograph taken a year ago when our project was under construction, you can see some of the things that the automobile did to the Saarinen and Kiley Park, about an 85-acre park on the edge of the Mississippi. First of all, in the 50s, the Eisenhower administration networked the entire country with an interstate highway system, and in St. Louis, I-70 was dropped below grade. So the Arch grounds site before the Arch and the park were constructed were actually severed from the downtown. That posed a major issue of continuity and separation. The second is, this is the Eed Bridge in the foreground, designed by James Eads. And right where the large land crater is created was a 5-acre parking garage. And so the way that the Arch grounds worked when we started was basically all the visitors came. They came on the other side of the moat that the interstate highway created, and they parked in the garage, and they left. And so their visit to St. Louis wasn't remotely tied into the fabric of the downtown. And our assignment was first to change that, but secondly, since St. Louis, like many cities, is going through a period now of renewal of the downtown and residential occupation is just beginning to happen in St. Louis, the project was all about creating a series of bridges, physical bridges, metaphorical bridges, and activity bridges to stitch the city and the Arch grounds back together. So here we are, we're on the edge of St. Louis on the west side. And you can see the effect that the interstate had in creating this terrible divide between the city and the national park land that was there. And on the right, our land bridge, many urban parks are built on structure. We don't realize it. We don't understand that there are subways and cars down there. But with a DOT grant through the Obama stimulus program, we built a platform and a park, and then a new architectural entrance to create a welcoming portal to the city on that side. And here you can see by the Eads Bridge what the parking garage was like. And we took that down and we relocated the parking into the city. So what visitors do now is they arrive in St. Louis, they park in a garage, they walk through the city, they come to the Arch grounds, they go up the Arch, and then they go back. And so we have taken these 800,000 or 900,000 visitors a year and knitted them back into the daily life of the city. The waterfront is pretty amazing, subject to flooding. And I might say that basically most of our moves in this project as park makers are at the scale of infrastructure. We raised the elevation of the the avenue along the edge of the Mississippi enough feet to reduce the number of times per year the street is closed due to flooding, and then the site was completely inaccessible for people with limitations on mobility. And so 4 ramps, meandering and gently graded so that people could use them in wheelchairs, and older people with movement limitations could use the arch grounds as well. And then the reimagining of the elevated edge of the river for gatherings and civic events. And this is a piece that didn't happen, but I always have to put it in because I love it, which is a skating rink. A big part of our work is thinking about how parks are usable, not just on beautiful days like we're having today, but all of the years of the season. So that's a piece that's yet to come. Dan Kiley and Saarinen actually met as soldiers in the war. They were stationed in France. They became very enamored with classical French gardens, and Dan Kiley's work as a landscape architect has some of that formality. You may know Dan's work. It's all over America, but this was our rendering of a redesign of the Kiley ceremonial alleys to the end of the arch, and he was a big advocate of monocultures. Not something that I'm into personally, but because of the standing of this landscape as a National Registered Landmark, we had to do an in-kind recreation of that. So we replanted with London Planes 900 of them, and those were gathered together and grown in a nursery outside of St. Louis and then transplanted incrementally into the downtown.
I want to just preempt you with Maggie Daley, because Maggie Daley Park in Chicago was really developed and designed to get around a problem that's a very, very hot topic right now, and that is, are cities getting, mega cities like Chicago, overrun by tourists? Are tourists a problem? You've got Barcelona, Venice, other European cities cracking down, making ordinances to reduce the number of tourists. And what they found in Chicago was that Millennium Park, big glamorous park, big project, very, very tourist-centric. And the natives were, shut out. And this is a park really for the people of Chicago. So tell us how you think differently about a park that's a world park, something like Valkenburgh Park, and something that really is.
Yeah, I was working on another project in Chicago last week, and it was our first meeting, and the guy said, not knowing that I designed this park, we don't want something tacky like Maggie Daley Park. Not really good on the quick exchange, but after sitting there for 2 hours and stewing, at the end of the meeting when he apologized, I said, well, this park wasn't designed for people that use the word tacky, which is sort of the essence of Mayor Daley, who was, he didn't realize it. He was in his final term as mayor when we started, and he said, I want this to be a place that the entire city, and especially children, will come to. It's really a park for kids, and kids like tacky stuff. So anyway, there it is in all of its vulgar humanity. Wildly popular. Those kids are having a terrible time that are coming at us there. There's a silent emanation of the word tacky that we have going on there.
Michael, I have a quick question, which I was going to ask you when we look at pictures of Brooklyn Bridge, which is a park I take my child, but when you're designing a park for children, security is a big issue for parents. They don't want too much curvilinear space because they're afraid they're not going to see their children, which is something I know people have mentioned to me about Brooklyn Park. But how do you think about that when you're designing? I mean, how is it?
Everything that you do when you're working with children is straddling the line between challenging them and watching out for their safety. So it's completely a balancing act of, if it's not a little challenging, they'll be bored and they won't come back. And if it's too challenging, they may not mind it, but the parents won't come back because they're like, where did my kid go? a skating rink in the winter and a rollerblading rink in the summer. And then this is kind of an amazing story. Tulsa, it's about a $220 million investment in a 66-acre park. Tulsa is kind of, I really love Tulsa, but it's a city that's going through a transition with the shift from the emphasis on oil and energy. There's a lot of philanthropy in the town, and this project is entirely paid for with private money. It is meant to be, they thought a lot about the name, a gathering place for Tulsa. I kind of don't like names like that usually because park says so much, but I love the name because it really says what they want it to be.
And it had no big public.
It has no big park.
Incredible, really.
You know, it has no big park, so it's really a place for people to come together. A lot of our work is informed by studying and abstracting things we find in the surrounding larger natural landscape. I think as a species that has evolved for millions of years, ourselves are deeply moved in ways that we never fully understand by what happens when we see and experience landscape. So I don't see parks as an escape from the city. I see them as an escape in the city and therefore an essential part of what a city is. So we're making these very strong expressions of indigenous stone that creates one of the entrances. It's really not explaining how it works there very well, and recycling and being responsible with materials. These are trees that we had to remove because of some buildings that were being built, and we are repurposing them as part of the playground experience in Tulsa.
Before we get to Toronto, a question about Tulsa, because it was funded with $280 million of money from the Kaiser Family Foundation.
Not only Kaiser, but significantly George Kaiser Family Foundation.
And was there with a lot of input from the community, from citizens of Tulsa, with that much power coming from a philanthropy plus input for community, was there tension between what they wanted to do and your own vision? I mean, the city is always, somebody's always the client, so there's always that problem. But
I don't have time to tell everybody here today the remarkable vision and goals of that foundation, but it is entirely about the people that it's for. And so even though the Kaiser family supported this, everything that we did was vetted and tested through public meetings, and the direction of the park very much came from what we learned in that process. So this is, we have to be done in 10 minutes.
But wait, I wanted to say,
Can I just say one funny thing?
Yeah.
She asked me a minute ago if I do any international work,
he
even
said
though
Toronto.
we have to remember that Canada is not part of the United States. And they're very proud of that right now, actually, up there. They refer to us as south of the border. But this is a very cool project. It's a landform that engineers created to stop flooding in this new neighborhood that's being built beyond. And then our park is like a cap on top of it. So in this view, it's a little hard to see, but this is a huge earth form, and there's a river that the person taking the picture was roughly over. But in 1954, this entire part of Toronto was flooded by an errant hurricane that got off course and went into Canada. And so at the pace that the Canadians work at, which is perhaps slow and steady, this remarkable piece of infrastructure is partnered with something through Waterfront Toronto to make a new neighborhood park here. And it's very sustainable. It's reusing site runoff to do all the water functions of the park from
That's rainwater, right?
rainwater is saved and contoured into cisterns and then treated through a series of wetlands on the site, and then that treated water is the water for the playgrounds and things like that. It's a stridently native palette of plants. This is a project that was entirely publicly funded and navigated through the Toronto Parks Department and is maintained. And by the way, this is about half the budget of a typical American park, extremely tight budget. Pavilion by Mary Ann Thompson with a fire pit for winter use. And this is the wetland and the bridge over it where the collected rainwater is being naturally filtered. This is powerful. I mean, in 4 years, we may forget that we're able to do this, but as of 6 months ago, this was the direction that all environmental treatment of stormwater was headed, of using just the processes of natural systems to do treating. And Brooklyn Bridge Park, we both live in the neighborhood, so she wanted to do it last. And it has had a little airtime, so some of you may know it. This is an incredible story in the fact that it is over 85% publicly funded by both the city of New York and the state of New York over a planning and design period of 18 years. So to have that many mayors and that many governors continue to support, Republican, Democrat, to continue to support it. And it's largely around the fact that Brooklyn is a borough of 2.8 million people and really had not had a major new park since Prospect Park by Olmsted and Vaux in 1870.
I want to say one thing as somebody who lives in the area. One concern when the park was being developed was that it is in a very affluent part of Brooklyn on the riverfront view of Manhattan, and everyone thought, well, this is a very already aesthetically blessed neighborhood getting more beauty. How are we going to draw? How are we going to integrate it? How are we going to get people from suffering communities well into central Brooklyn? A lot of people thought it wouldn't happen, and it has in part because it offers wonderful spaces for people to play. And there's a ferry that comes now from Williamsburg, and it brings, for instance, the Hasidic community is very lively for
Very unusual.
Very unusual. So you go there, and it really, really
They don't talk to you,
is
but
a melting
they
pot. You didn't.
I go up to them and say hello. I was in the park the other day with my granddaughter, and she said, "How famous are you?" And I said, "Why do you want to know?" She said, "I'm going to walk up to everybody and tell them that you made this when we go to the park." It's like, Grace, we're not going to do that. A couple of before and after pictures to remember. I mean, we're running out of time. It's a kind of incredible story. The site became defunct because of container shipping. The draw on the size of boats that container ships use is so deep that it can't navigate the East River. So even though these piers were all built in the 50s, by the 80s, we stopped doing shipping that way. And so that's why this large piece of land became available. And I know many of you represent dimensions of city government. You all know that we now make places where there largely has been a change of land use, which is so different from, say, 150 years ago, where Olmsted would say, like, oh, I like that site north of the city. I think I'm going to make a park up there.
Right, and now, of course, parks are really combatants in the war against climate change as well. It's something that I know you're always thinking about. Let's take some questions.
Let me just finish
I'm
Brooklyn.
sorry.
So this is Pier 1. It's fitted out. It's raked, and it's fitted out to have movies and music, and then it can that screen is inflatable. It collapses, it goes away, and so it's one of the important things about urban spaces is that they have programmatic flexibility about them. And this is just kind of my favorite piece, Pier 2, which is basically a temple of basketball. This is really what Brooklyn Heights didn't want us to build, because if you look at the photograph on the right, those are probably not the people who came from the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood to play basketball, if I can be.
But to play devil's advocate for a second, the park is built, there's a section of piers, right? They're rebuilt piers. if these basketball courts were more integrated into other pier spaces, would, you know, there is this question now, is there this racial segregation? And it's a park for everybody, but there is some segregation within the piers, you know, within the park. Do you sometimes think about that, if it had been done a little, the courts had...
I never think about that, because all I have to do is go on Pier 2 and see hotshot basketball players playing with other hotshot basketball players, and I think they'd be very unhappy if they were dispersed all over the park. It's really a temple of basketball.
Right.
It's also a temple of handball, and there's some other good stuff there. We have to go quickly, but anyway, this makes me really happy, and it was not popular. So we've remade a natural edge. This was super important in Superstorm Sandy, in terms of the ability, where the guy with the blue T-shirt is on, the water was up about to his ears in Superstorm Sandy, so this entire park was inundated with salt water during the storm event. And you can see we were ready for it. Everything is armored with boulders, just like the entire New England shore and much of the east coast of the United States is reinforced to prevent erosion. And then my other favorite area is the Picnic Peninsula, where there are 36 public grills with views to Lower Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty, and all you have to do is show up and use it. And pretty great when you go there and see what's going on. This is a segment we've just completed. This is our newest child. We're very proud of it. We have to show it to you, but it's the Upland of Five, and that's a sound berm to create the noise of the BQE, which is on the right side. So the sound, as it hits the landform, pushes up, and it travels over the landform, and then its energy dissipates as the sound is traveled over a larger distance, and it makes the park usable otherwise on the inside. The planting being finished, what it's like on the inside.
The grass is mowed by goats, by the way. Goats, because it's elevated, you can't mow, so you'll walk in
It's a little steep.
Goats eating the grass.
So, and then the playgrounds, which are, these are the real, in fact, your community is there that you were mentioning.
Yes.
Getting a little crazy, actually, there.
It's very crowded, yeah.
And kids are the major focus of some areas of the park as well. This is a water play area at the end of Atlantic Avenue, which is one of our major residential areas in Brooklyn, with just tons of people with kids living there, and no parkland.
Right.
So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have time for just one or two very quick questions.
Want to jump in? Yeah, good.
Hi, Stacy Butte from Phoenix, Arizona. We're home to both the #1 and #2 largest municipal parks in the nation, I'm proud to say. Huge natural areas. We do big 30,000 acre kinds of parks in Phoenix. However, our entire park and preserve system is a legacy of really mid-20th century visionaries. And we're a rapidly growing region, the #1 fastest growing county in the nation, Maricopa County. And I'm looking for, I guess this is more a comment than it is anything, I'm looking for those visionaries, those Olmsteds who can say, hey, I'm really liking that place in the northwest part of the county, and we think that should be a giant natural area. And I don't want us to forget in this room that we still have new cities coming on board, even in this country, developing areas that we need to be really thoughtful about these public goods, these parks and preserves. Sorry, that wasn't really a question. I apologize.
Do you want an amen from you, or?
That's a great point.
Right at the aisle over there.
One more?
Yeah, one more quick one. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Audrey, and I'm a student at Pomona College. And I'm from Los Angeles, and they're trying to make a strip of greenway along the LA River, which is currently encased in concrete. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on creating public park spaces in very urban areas where there's very limited land, and a lot of it is privately owned, and there's a lot of ecological constraints on the general ability to make green space.
So what's the cusp of her question?
How, how do you make green space when there really isn't a lot, right? When there isn't literal green space, how do you make parks out of land that it's more difficult to make parks from?
Great pairing of questions. I don't think a site needs to be generous in its scale to be rewarding and fulfilling. I didn't show it, and really it's Matt Urbanski's project, but we're doing an overlay right now of the entire 600 square miles of Houston, where a lot of the opportunity for parks like the ones, I mean, there are some wonderful parks in Houston, but we're doing an overlay of the entire city to see how sites like the one you described can be effective. And I think one of the most important things, and you kind of tiptoed up to the edge of this, is that if they're small, they're more powerful if they're networked together, because we can tie our circulation as park users together in a way that we can go long distances, and maybe we can't go long distances side to side, but if there are a way that we can piece together connections. I mean, I'm a big walker. I live in Brooklyn, but I'm a big walker, and I love going in Brooklyn Bridge Park, but I do a lot of other walking in Brooklyn where the quality of street trees and small urban spaces can be very rewarding. The key is tying them together, like even if sometimes you're using part of a street for that.
Right. All right.
And what's trying to be done on the LA River is a remarkable and important undertaking for Los Angeles. Really great project.
All right, thank you, Michael. That was
You're
great.
welcome.
Thank you.